If you've been paying attention to what's been going on in Commander today, this is a sound you might have actually heard coming from some people you know.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Yeah, that might be the collective sound of some of your friends in your playgroups making this sound because they might have lost some money here because we've had our first bans in almost 3 years in the format when Hull Breacher and Golos got banned. So today's bans include Dockside Extortionist, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, and Nadu Winged Wisdom. So let's go ahead and break down these bans and see where I stand on them and see how they're going to affect everybody. As I said in the intro, it's been about 3 years since our last bans where Hull Breacher and Golos got clubbed over the head and shoved into the ban box. But like with those cards, this latest announcement has some justifiable ones as well as some controversial ones. So let's get into that. First up is the justified ban, starting with Nadu Winged Wisdom. The bird was just too damn good, and not only that, it became a massive time suck like it did in Modern. The rules committee had basically the same reasoning behind it in terms of banning it in Commander as the Wizards did for Modern. Its win patterns were not guaranteed. You had to sit there and watch and see if a window would actually open up where you could try and disrupt the Nadu player, and they could just as easily fizzle themselves out, not winning anything and sucking up large stretches of time while taking really long turns, making the rest of the pod just kind of sit there and watch them play solitaire, essentially. I fully agree with this particular ban because the nature of turning it into a one-sided game, and because I just don't like to play a game where I'm watching someone take a 10-minute plus turn and not actually win the game every time that happens, Nadu needed to go. Next up in the massacre of cards, though, is Dockside Extortionist. We're entering the territory of cards that probably shouldn't have been banned, long time ago. If you've been on the receiving end of a Dockside Extortionist making a boatload of treasure tokens, you know why this card got hit. It's just one of those cards that likely should have never been printed in the first place, but I can see why they made the design. In the mind of Wizards of the Coast, it's a quote-unquote red way of either ramping or having a catch-up mechanic on mana when you're behind, but the only problem is I don't think they realized how this goofy little goblin would end up being as strong as it was. Even as early as turn 2, the Dockside player could suddenly go up 4 to 7 treasures, setting up a huge turn 3 and blow out the rest of the table. It only scaled up from there since the longer the game went, the more treasures it could make. Couple that with the ability to flicker it, bounce it, and recast it, or just flat out reanimate it. Yeah, I just fully agree with this ban as well. It's just too abusable, and it's a card that for 2 mana can make more mana than any ritual style card ever printed, and probably shouldn't have passed muster when they did playtesting for it, if they even playtested it. Now that's the 2 cards I agree with the bans. Neither Nadu or Dockside should have probably ever made it to print in the form they came to us in, and in the case of Dockside, it probably should have been banned years ago. However, the next 2 bans are very clearly in the what the frack category. Jeweled Lotus was the next casualty of this slew of bans. A card with Lotus in the name has a large expectation placed on it, and even with the major limitation that you could only use it to play your commander, it did not disappoint. It made 5 to 7 mana commanders playable in high power and even competitive EDH, but apparently that jump in mana was just too much for the game in the eyes of the rules committee. They didn't like it contributing to games consistently ending on turn 6 to 8 in a casual game, so it too has been banned, and the exact same idea has been applied to Mana Crypt, and it resulted in being banned from the format as well. Crypt has been in Commander since the inception of the format, and at this point I can't understand why all of a sudden it's become a priority to remove it from Commander. Yeah, it sucks when someone can quickly outpace you and burst ahead in mana, but the rationale of it cropping up in casual to end games too quickly just doesn't sit well with me. Now, most of these cards from my own experience, they don't even show up all that often due to their prices. I know for my own builds, I do not use any of these cards. I just simply cannot justify spending $80 to $200 in the case of the fast mana cards to put into a deck, and I just don't like Nadu because I think it's a design mistake and I dislike the play patterns that it created, so I just never bothered building around it. Most players that I know sit in a similar situation. They just don't use this stuff because they can't afford it or they refuse to pay for it, which kind of self-regulates the use of the cards in Commander. Or they just simply create their own ban list, and many of these cards were already house banned, along with things like Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, because many players in those groups already recognize that the fast mana causes a lot of feel bads, especially when some players in the group either lucked out and opened something like a Crypt or a Jeweled Lotus, or they could actually afford to buy the singles, but then others in the group couldn't, putting those players at a severe disadvantage whenever they played against the players who had them already. So now players across the world get the feels bad of having spent money on these cards only to have them randomly ripped away, costing them hundreds of dollars. There was no indication that any of these mana rocks were going to get banned out of the format today. The prices of Dockside Extortions, Mana Crypt, and Jeweled Lotus have already started to crash within hours of the announcement. Dockside and Lotus went from around $80 for their cheapest copies to around $30 to $40 as of this recording, and Mana Crypt is going for as low as $75 to $80, down from around $190 about 3 days ago on Friday. I think that these prices are a little overreactionary, but if they continue to crash, you may want to snag a copy of each of these for either like a Commander Cube or the remote chance that someday they may actually get unbanned. Of course, that leaves the big question of why Sol Ring, the most famous offender of fast mana rocks in the format, escaped the Banhammer. The excuses are kind of flimsy at best as far as I can see it. They say, the ubiquity of it in the format and the association are the big ones. The fact that it's in nearly every precon ever printed is another one. But none of those excuses are insurmountable or valid as to why the card is untouchable. It's not super expensive, so no one's going to be out hundreds of dollars over the Sol Rings getting banned, unlike the ones that got banned today. If the card is hurting the format, the status should not matter. It should be removed as easily as some of these more expensive cards were. And as for the precons, they could just do a simple solution. Slot in a basic land. It doesn't have to be complicated, even if it's not very elegant. And the reason I'm going after the Sol Ring after they've already ripped this other stuff away is quite simple. The stats show that if you start off with a Sol Ring on turn 1, your odds of winning that game go way up in relation to everybody else, especially if they don't have their own Sol Rings. And it's easily the best card that you can put in every single commander deck you ever build. It's just about as big of an auto include as you get in Commander. If the rules commander were actually, adopting a philosophy similar to how cards get banned in any other Magic format, Sol Ring would have gotten banned into the ground for the fact that it shows up in so many decks and gives such a huge advantage to the caster. I mean, hell, this card is so good that it's restricted in Vintage and banned in Legacy formats where the most powerful cards of this game live and breathe. If you want to truly slow down casual games, Sol Ring should have been on the chopping block a long time ago. All in all, I'm okay with the banning of Dockside and Nadu, but the loss of Crypt and Lotus is going to really hurt the format, and it's going to draw a lot more eyes onto Sol Ring for dodging that Banhammer once again, and they're going to start running out of excuses why that card got to survive when these ones didn't. With that said, let me know when you think it down in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching, have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.